William Middleton is a journalist and editor who has worked in New York and Paris. He has been the fashion features director for Harper's Bazaar and the Paris bureau chief for Fairchild Publications, overseeing W Magazine and Women's Wear Daily. He has written for the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, Vogue, House and Garden, Esquire, Texas Monthly, Texas and Leisure, Departures, and the International Herald Tribune. And now he's the author of Double Vision, an unerring eye of art world avatars Dominique and John de Menil, a much-anticipated double biography published by Knopf on March 27th. Hi, William. Thanks so much for talking with me today, and welcome to the program.
Oh, terrific. Thank you very much, Cameron. I'm thrilled to be here.
Could you please tell us more about Dominique and John de Menil, the subjects of your book? Who were they, and why are they important to Houston?
Okay. Well, first of all, they came to Houston in the 1940s. They were French, both originally from Paris. They married in 1931, and John de Menil joined the family company 7 years later. The family company was Schlumberger Limited, which, as you know, is a huge oil services company. Her maiden name was Dominique Schlumberger. Her father founded the company. So Jean joined, and they came to Houston because it was the American headquarters of Schlumberger. And what the reason their story is so compelling, I believe, is they always had a place in New York. They always had starting in 1960, it was a major townhouse in New York. They always had a place in Paris. They had a place outside of Paris. But everything they did was here in Houston because they felt that they were needed here. They felt their fortune came from Houston, and they felt that their presence was necessary here. And so that's why I think it's an important story.
That's really fascinating, and I remember you referring to them, or somewhere I read online about them being the anti-Enron, and they seem to embody that throughout their whole lives. It's just amazing the philanthropic efforts and the positive presence they had in Houston. Really, essentially, as you were saying, creating an oasis of culture here in the Petro Metro. So it's a fascinating read. I look to learn more about their stories through reading the book. The brief little sections I have perused over have been fascinating in what I've read online. So I cannot wait to delve deeper into that. Certainly.
Yeah, it's a big book, but as I always say, they led big lives, and I think that the more we know about their background, the more we understand about their lives in Europe before they got here, the more we understand why they did what they did. They lived in Paris at an extraordinary time, and they arrived in Houston, which in the 1940s, first didn't have air conditioning. Second, didn't have a lot of. One little fact that I love in the book is that I found out that at that point in the 1940s and through the 50s, really, Houston for the consulate staff was considered a hardship post.
Wow!
It was like being in a war zone. Right. So they arrived here in Houston, and there wasn't a lot. It wasn't that there was nothing, but there wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot of culture. There wasn't a lot of art. And they took a look around and said, let's do something about that.
What are some of the most surprising and or interesting things you learned researching their lives?
Well, one of the things that was really interesting for me is it has been known that they were interested in civil rights, and that civil rights was a major part of their mission here. And mission, I've learned, is not too strong of a word. When I first started researching this, some people suggested that, maybe that was kind of overstating it. But the more I learned, they were on a mission here in Houston. And civil rights was an important part of that mission. And it was something that began earlier than anyone understood. In 1956 and 1957, there were some sit-ins that took place not long after Rosa Parks. There were some sit-ins with TSU students, and the Dominils helped fund their legal defense. The TSU 5, who were falsely accused of starting a riot at TSU in the 1960s, the Dominils paid for their defense, and they paid to bus spectator well-wishers to the court case in Victoria.
Wow.
And they were actively involved in the fight for civil rights, always discreetly, always behind the scenes, not trying to take credit. They played a major role in helping Mickey Leland become the person he became, a U.S. congressman from Texas. They would never have said that they made Mickey Leland, but they allowed him to become the man he became, and the great leader he became.
Wow.
So that was, I was speaking with someone named Deloitte Parker, who runs the Shape Community Center.
Sure.
And I asked him, were there a lot of people who were doing this sort of thing, who were being this helpful? And he said, not rich white men from River Oaks.
Wow.
So
what an impact they had.
It's fascinating, I think.
Wow, and that's amazing because they were very much, had a presence in the Houston community. I mean, they were there, and their presence was known, and their activities were known, and yet at the same time, like you were mentioning, they had a very private existence at the same time, and were very, private people. So the relationship that you built during this plus 10 years of research and putting together this double biography really is quite, it's an honor. I'm sure it's a privilege for us as Houstonians to be able to learn more about them, and such a joy to have such an extensively researched double biography. So we thank you as Houstonians for your efforts.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a joy to sit down and think about these lives for this long, because it's like, if you work on a project for that long, I can imagine that there are some that you might become kind of tired of.
Sure.
But I found that the more I researched the Menil story, the sort of more interesting, the more compelling, the more impressive it became.
Wow.
So that's rare, I think. Another thing that was exciting about this project is the Menils were sort of very good at what we would call compartmentalization. Everyone in their world knew a little bit of their story, but no one knew the whole thing. People who were involved with the museum here knew the museum. People who were involved in their activities in Paris knew those. People who were involved in civil rights knew that. But no one knew the entirety of what they were doing. So part of this project became like detective work, sort of sitting down and looking at all of these disparate elements and then trying to bring them together in some kind of narrative. And, even family members, even people who knew them extraordinarily well, never knew all of the things that happened. And there are things like the information in World War II, when Dominique is in France during the fall of France, and she, joins what is the largest mass exodus in history at that point, 11 million people on the roads of France. And she's writing Jean every day to tell him what's going on,
Wow.
And their lives during World War II were extraordinary. And I mean, they could be a film, right? But no
certainly.
one, because they were doing so much afterwards, they never sat down with people and said, well, let us tell you about what we were doing during World War II.
Wow.
And so all of that is new in the book, and it's all like, primary research as it's happening. They're writing one another, describing what they're going through, and I find it fascinating.
That's incredible. And I think, as private as they were, it's almost like they were predicting or they knew that the lives they were leading would have an impact and would be meaningful to those around them, and also important that the Houston community and the world would know that someday. It almost seemed, by the way they were so fastidiously saving and archiving themselves everything, and so meticulously compartmentalizing and documenting their day-to-day existence. So that's just another incredibly fascinating part of their lives, just how they were so detail-oriented along the way with all the engagements they were involved with.
Absolutely. They kept everything. And I think part of the reason why is they understood the sort of historical import of what was going on. And I'd like to think that they were, thinking of their biographer. They wanted to make it easy for their biographer. Although I have to tell you that having that massive material doesn't always make it easy. It's great for detail, but then you have to do something with all that, right?
Exactly.
It's a lot of information to try to get a handle on.
Oh, I imagine.
It's rare that any two lives are as beautifully documented as these. So that was a great gift.
I really enjoyed the quote from Dominique de Menil on the word controversial that you selected as your epigraph. Do you have a favorite passage from your book you'd like to share with our listeners?
I do, and it's On one hand, it could be a small incident, but it's one that I think is really revealing. And that is in January 1964, there was a man named Ted Law, who was married to Carolyn Weiss Law, who was a major heiress here. Her father was one of the founders of Humble Oil. And he invited them, Dominique and Jean, to a dinner at their house in River Oaks, and he said that it was to be a gathering for, quote, true conservatives.
Ah.
And so John replied, "We hate to disappoint you because we consider ourselves as your friends, and we'd like both of you. I'm afraid we are not true conservatives, Dominique and I. Actually, we are Kennedy Democrats. Isn't it awful?" And then he said, although we do not see eye to eye with you, we wish you good luck for your dinner. We also hope there are projects on which we can see eye to eye and work shoulder to shoulder. Conservative or liberal politics are one thing, and an important one. But what we do with our power, our overwhelming power, to stand in history as a great civilization, that is important too, very important indeed. And this is a field in which conservatives and liberals can agree and pull together.
Wow.
So it's a beautiful letter, I think, that really gets to, it gives you a sense of who John de Menil was as well. You know, it's like there's humor in it, but he's not going to pretend he's something he isn't. And then he sketches out this beautiful solution, I think, you know, and this great statement about how, you know, left or right, we should be working together. We should want the world to be as good as it can be. And I think that kind of diplomacy and flair was something that served him very well in Houston.
Wow. And he's a man of integrity, and I think he sort of transcended sort of definitions of, you know, conservative, liberal, you know, black, white. He was looking for the greater good, the sort of common denominator all the time. That kind of bridge building was, I think, certainly it seemed like it was a defining characteristic of him, and a very admirable characteristic at that.
Absolutely.
Certainly. Wonderful. Dominique de Menil's father founded Schlumberger. And John de Menil came from a celebrated line of French military leaders. In each family history, what did you find most striking?
In both family histories, one of the things that's really interesting is what an incredible heritage they have of sort of achievement and sort of academic, I guess I can say, intelligence. You know, they were really focused on achievement and yes, on intelligence. And in terms of the Schlumberger family, one of the things that was most notable was, you know, they were prominent on French soil 11 generations before the birth of Dominique.
Wow.
You know, so
Wow.
so you know, there's a very long history of a very long family history there. And you know, I think a great revelation is the second chapter of the book. Someone named Francois Guizot, who was Dominique's great grandfather. And he was someone who was one of the most fascinating figures of 19th century France. He was essentially the prime minister under King Louis Philippe, who was the last king of France. And from 1830 to 1848, he was an incredible historian. He sort of founded the idea of history in France, of a certain kind of modern history. And his house in Normandy is a place where Dominique grew up as a child. And it's something that is intact and exactly as it was when he lived there. And he was an incredibly important figure for her. So on the de Menil side, what was most important is understanding this kind of militaristic intensity that the family had. You know, Jean's great-grandfather was a colonel under Napoleon and fought on battlefields across Europe for 25 years and was ennobled by Napoleon, was given the title of Baron.
Wow.
And then also the family fell on kind of tough financial times around the time John was born, because his father decided to honor the debts, I guess we can say, of a distant relative, and he and his brother-in-law, Jean's uncle, were essentially bankrupted around the time Jean was born. Really? But they did it in order to protect the honor of the family name. And Dominique was always so struck by that. You know, it's estimated that they paid what today would be about $25 million.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
To protect the family. And so the sense of honor, the sense of integrity, the sense of kind of militaristic passion was something that was very strong in his family.
Wow, fascinating. I remember also at one time, I believe you were mentioning in your author talk last Tuesday, the time when they were in Bucharest, I believe, and
Yes.
he was instrumental in sort of stopping oil shipments to the German Nazi, those shipments, and he ended up winning a prestigious award. So that was part of his character, is a sense of sort of national responsibility and keeping the French. Pride going, even though he was, coming here to the United States, and he definitely embraced the Texas oil man, but, France and doing work on behalf of the French people was definitely something that he always maintained. So that was a very interesting part of the book as well.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap things up, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners about the book or anything else?
Well, I think, a biography like this, the idea of biography as it began, as I understand it, was that it's about it's a document of exemplary lives, and I think the Menils led extraordinarily exemplary lives, and I think that this was not an easy project to make happen. It was something that I worked on, not just for the amount of time, but for many reasons. It was a very challenging project to make happen. And the thing that kept me going for so long is that I felt that these are the kind of people that we need to be reading about today.
These kinds of stories are uplifting. They remind us of goodness, and to keep that flame alive of goodness and giving back to the community. So I think that part of the book is so inspiring. I think many people are going to be fascinated to learn more about it.
They had a great fortune, Dominique and Jean de Menil, but they felt that fortune brought with it a responsibility to make the world a better place. And I think that that's a great lesson for today, because I'm not sure that everyone does. And so I think that it's an important lesson.
Well, thank you so much, William. It has been an honor chatting with you. And again, many thanks to all of your valiant efforts over these past 10 plus years to put together this wonderful dual biography. We cannot wait to get our hands on it and learn more about the rich and wonderfully diverse history of the de Menils and the Schlumberger line, and the wonderful contributions that Dominique and Jean made to the Houston community and to the world.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's great to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much again, William. Have a wonderful day, and best of luck on the rest of your author tour.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Take care.
All right, bye.